Greetings, citizens of the world.
This is Virtual Verity.
We are anonymous.
It has cameras and sensors.
It's a podcast.
A group of hackers.
Guacamaya.
They're the infiltrated service of armed forces in Chile, Peru, Colombia, and El Salvador.
Desde abril sabemos que un grupo de hacktivistas ha filtrado miles de documentos.
Hacker group CiberinteligenciaSV released part of the software wallet source code on breach forums.
Con los guacaleaks como nos hemos puesto algunos.
I'm Mark Bruno, a cybersecurity and conflict analyst. This is Virtual Verity, where I discuss topics at the nexus of technology, infosec, open source intelligence, and modern conflict. So this is the final piece of the story about Chivo Wallet as far as what we'll cover on this series anyway. If anyone is wondering, yes, this part was rewritten and re-recorded in November. Why did I wait so long? I'll get more specific about the details in the newsletter that should be coming out in December. You can check that out in the episode links or find the Moloch on Steady, our newsletter provider. But at the end of the day, it ended up being for the best, as a lot has come out that wasn't in May when I initially started putting this together. And frankly, I don't think the story that I started to cover here is even close to the end. In fact, I think the episode would have been severely lacking if I had rushed it out in April or May. And in the weeks leading up to this recording, the threat actor renewed their campaign in ways that'll be made clear if you keep listening. Let's just say, for the completeness of the story, this was it was a good idea to wait. There are also a bunch of other reasons why the production on this one kind of became a nightmare, but it's water under my bridge anyway, because I'm a one-man show here. So why does that matter to this episode, and why would I say something like that? Well, this final episode is more or less what I originally wanted to cover when I was like, let's do something about the Chivo Wallet hacks, which is just the April cybersecurity incident involving the leaks surrounding the Chivo Wallet hacks by the threat actor known as CiberinteligenciaSV. In this particular episode, I'm going to cover the actual incidents, the threat actor themselves, some context in their corner within Latin America's cybercriminal and hacktivist landscape, and explain some of their motives in their own words. While I went into writing this episode knowing far less than I do now about the subject matter, I learned pretty quickly that this would take a lot more understanding of the geopolitical context than I originally anticipated. Hence the previous 3 episodes, 3 hours of this. So while I think of the 4 episodes, this is probably the one that it might be the most possible to enjoy as a standalone piece. I'd encourage you to listen to the first 3 in order to make up the gap in context, or so you could just understand why I treated this quite a bit differently than any other story I had wanted to cover here before. When I first started looking into CiberinteligenciaSV, I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting much. You spend a lot of time following hacktivists. You know the type. There's some edgy Twitter account. They post a Guy Fawkes mask. They DDoS a website for 10 minutes, say they've stuck it to the imperialists or whatever. More often than not, it's a whole lot of noise without any clear point, or, there's Putin simps. But Cyberintelligentsia was, they're different. The more I dug in, the more surprised I became. It wasn't the work of some shit-posting opportunists looking for clout for the most part. Instead, I found a group or person who is deliberate and very aware of their public image. They've given interviews, they've released manifestos, and more importantly, they seem committed to an anti-corruption message. They've even provided for free a series of Telegram-based bot services for going through the documents that they've leaked, which some traditional outlets have even used to improve their own anti-corruption investigations. Despite the Bukele administration's flashy promises of modernization, its reckless approach to all of this technology, Bitcoin, Chivo Wallet, everything, has left the country really vulnerable. People's identities, their data, their freedoms have been compromised. This is completely even outside of the mass incarceration and, sold out to a system that prioritizes their optics over national security and the investment mostly from foreigners over any sense of actual justice for their own people. Like, sure, they lowered the crime rates, but at the cost of incarcerating how many innocent people. And we'll get to it. Some of the documents that Cyberintelligentsia leaked did lead to other outlets being able to locate people who were disappeared by the government. To Cyberintelligentsia, the Bukele regime represents something very dark. And regarding Chivo Wallet specifically, in some of their earliest press appearances, the group actually refers to Chivo Wallet as a tool of not necessarily government surveillance, but a tool for centralizing power. Now, that's not to say, and I'll probably get into it a little bit later, that they didn't have some good things to say about some of the immediate effects of the things that Bukele had done, or at least those respective of like public safety and just being able to go out at night. So I don't want to paint them as like someone with absolutely no sense of nuance. But at the end of the day, they just seem very principled. And while their methods, hacking, leaking sensitive data, they're not something I'm eager to endorse, it's hard to ignore the effectiveness of the campaign so far. They've exposed a lot of systemic weaknesses that no one else seemed willing to talk about. They've shown breach by breach just how insecure the Salvadoran state had become. It wasn't just chaos for chaos's sake. It's also worth noting how cooperative they've been with the press. They've made appearances largely in Spanish media, but in a couple crypto and cybersecurity outlets, and released carefully worded statements accompanied their leaks. It's really rare to see a threat actor this intentional about shaping public perception. Most threat actors now will just throw data onto the internet and let chaos play out. Ciberinteligencia has worked alongside journalists to tell a specific story, a story of the corruption at the heart of the Bukele administration's so-called progress. They're not beyond critique. They broke laws. They did potentially harm a lot of people, and they made choices I don't agree with, but the message and the way they've delivered it definitely deserves attention. They've shown the world that El Salvador's high-tech experiment is just that, an experiment, one that's failing the people it's supposed to be helping. There's also been some drama within or regarding and involving the group. They've claimed to be flushing out profiteers and more chaotic elements that attempted to make money from the stolen data. I'll try to get into that as best I can, but it may diverge a little too much from what I think is the very clear message that lies at the heart of their actions. CiberinteligenciaSV has surprised me, not just for the scale of their campaign, but for how human their message feels. They're not trying to burn the system down for fun. They're showing us a mirror. And as I dig deeper into their work, I realize they might not be the villain of the story, or at least not the one that we should be worried about. So let's take a look at where the campaign began earlier this year. On April 2nd, Cyberintelligentsia carried out 2 significant data breaches, seeming to target both El Salvador's citizens and the country's core security institutions. The leaks didn't just expose vulnerabilities, they were meant to send a deliberate message about the state of cybersecurity, privacy, and governance under President Nayib Bukele. The first leak of the citizen data was a massive database containing the personal information of approximately 5.1 million Salvadorans. That's about 80% of the country's population. It wasn't just a list of names. They leaked data totaling 144 gigs, including high-def photos directly tied to individuals' DUI, or effectively their social security numbers, full names, date of births, phone numbers, and email addresses, residential addresses, and other identifiable information. The sheer comprehensiveness of the leak posed an enormous risk for identity theft, fraud, and cybercrime. For millions of Salvadorans, the dump essentially turned their private lives into public records. As far as I could tell, on the same day, Cyberintelligentsia escalated their campaign by releasing sensitive email archives from the country's security forces. It included 10 million emails from the National Police and 250,000 emails from the country's military. These emails are believed to contain operational details, internal communications, and possibly PII, personal information, of law enforcement and military personnel. It's no stretch to think that this would have jeopardized national security and risked exposing officers and their families. But something that was interesting was that parts of the data were tied to the earlier Guacamaya leaks, one of the largest data breaches in Latin American history. The original Guacamaya leaks occurred in September 2022. The breach targeted military police institutions across multiple Latin American countries, including El Salvador, Mexico, Peru, Colombia, and Chile. The leaks exposed millions of emails, estimated over 10 terabytes of data, and sensitive documents from all of these institutions. In El Salvador's case, the leaks revealed collaboration between the military and criminal organizations, surveillance of activists and journalists, and potential human rights violations. The data was primarily obtained through vulnerabilities in email servers and was later shared with journalists and activist organizations, leading to widespread media coverage and calls for accountability in the affected countries. We'll have to put a pin in this because it will be coming up later, but at least at first, when I originally heard about this, I was like, well, how is this different from any other breach where, the threat actor pads the numbers to make it look more significant than it is? But there was a lot more to the story than this. Cyberintelligentsia repurposed the existing information, amplifying the impact and renewing scrutiny in El Salvador's digital infrastructure. After all, how could the government do such a poor job protecting such sensitive data? And given the press environment in El Salvador that we discussed in the previous episodes, Cyberintelligentsia was able to find a willing ear to get in front of the story. On both their digital channels and in the press, they were able to describe their actions as a deliberate attempt to highlight both authoritarian overreach and the government's failure to protect its citizens' most sensitive information. The leaks expose a deeply flawed system where the government's flashy tech initiatives like Chivo Wallet have been prioritized over basic cybersecurity protections, as well as to remind the public that the recent drop in gang violence might have come through less legitimate means. Despite the scale of the breaches, the Salvadoran government remained silent. Authorities had issued no public acknowledgement at the time, no guidance for affected citizens, and no clear steps to mitigate the risks. The absence of transparency only added weight to Cyberintelligentsia's message. The government had failed its people, not just politically, but technologically, and they were only getting started. Following this initial publication, Distributed Denial of Secrets, an organization kind of similar to WikiLeaks that originally received the Guacamaya leaks data, removed public access to the information. Their stated reason was to protect sources and integrity of their work. However, it was confirmed that multiple users had already downloaded the data before it was taken down and ensured its continued circulation online. I don't know all of the details, and I don't want to misrepresent either party's position in this, but it is my understanding that Cyberintelligentsia originally wanted Distributed Denial of Secrets as their platform rather than breach forums. But I can understand why a website that's considered relatively legitimate as Distributed Denial of Secrets wouldn't want something with unfiltered, non-redacted data of innocent people on it. I do know Distributed Denial of Secrets has had some of its staff involved with illegal activity before, but I don't think the organization themselves have endorsed any criminal activity. I could be wrong. I don't know them too well, but I definitely wouldn't want them to carry that. I was under the impression, at least in the US, they're considered an above-board organization. I do know that a statement by the staff at Distributed Denial of Secrets eventually not endorsed what Cyberintelligentsia did, but did kind of take the similar position of it still should be on the government to protect citizens' data adequately. So yeah, it just seems like a complicated relationship, or at least one with some nuances that have to be respected. 2 weeks later, after seeing no response from the government, Cyberintelligentsia published another massive leak. This one from the Ministry of Education. The database included full names, dates of birth, department, educational institution, and enrollment status of nearly 4.5 million students, both active and inactive. The breach also exposed sensitive information to minors, raising serious concerns about privacy and the potential for misuse. Educational representatives urged the ministry to investigate the breach and enhance data security measures. But despite the severity of the incident, the Ministry of Education issued no public response and provided no guidance to those affected. The lack of official acknowledgement drew criticism from educators and cybersecurity experts. It's like it didn't matter to the government. Then, on April 23rd, Cyberintelligentsia released parts of the Chivo Wallet source code, specifically targeting the software used in the ATMs. The group announced the leak on breach forums, stating, "This time, I bring you the code that is inside the Bitcoin Chivo Wallet ATMs in El Salvador. We publish everything for free for you." Alongside the source code, they disclose VPN access information, potentially allowing unauthorized entities to exploit the wallet's infrastructure. The dissemination of Chivo Wallet's source code and VPN credentials could enable malicious actors to identify and exploit vulnerabilities within the system, compromise user funds, and enable persistent breaches. While Chivo isn't a particularly popular wallet software, crypto as an industry certainly doesn't need any more vectors for fraud. And once again, despite the severity of the breach, the Salvadoran government issued no official response or taken any action at the time to mitigate the damage. The day after, the group conducted an interview with the Sheeb Daily, a cryptocurrency and DeFi publication. And while I'm usually pretty iffy on where publications like this stand, as many of the loudest actors in the crypto space seem willing to back an authoritarian, provided they promise to make them rich, I actually found this interview interestingly lacking in pushback against Cyberintelligentsia. It even hinted at and platformed some criticism of the crypto landscape in general in ways that surprised me. Its author, who identifies as Gushinkan Yona, also claims to hold no crypto assets in a disclosure statement at the end of the article. In the interview, they frame their actions as a form of protest against what they perceive as El Salvador's slide into authoritarianism. They deny being politically aligned or funded by any external actors, and they assert that their goal is to push back against totalitarian tendencies and protect democratic values. And a quote from the group, "Many believe that we are a political opposition. that a foreign government finances us, but no, we are simply people concerned because the country's headed toward a totalitarian state, and this is a form of protest. They criticize the state-controlled nature of Chivo Wallet and how it centralizes control over Bitcoin transactions, undermines user privacy, and blocks funds arbitrarily. They argue this is a misuse of Bitcoin's decentralized ethos and infringement on citizens' financial freedoms. What we are against is the use of the state wallet as an attempt to centralize Bitcoin, monitor, and analyze its users. Bitcoin was not designed for that. Goes over how they find the requirements to register for Chivo very invasive, which, I mean, fair point. The government wouldn't have all this data that could have been leaked if they didn't require a bunch of it in the first place to set up an account. As mentioned before, they do acknowledge some of the positive actions by the administration, but the group describes El Salvador in it as a suspicious democracy. And they talk about how short-term benefits may erode long-term democratic norms and protections, which, I mean, we're seeing right now. And at the end, the group also talks about how their goal is to expose vulnerabilities, promote data protection, and again, they try to frame it as a protest against technological overreach and government surveillance. A few days later, on April 29th, Ciberinteligencia claimed responsibility for yet another incident, this time targeting the servers of El Salvador's Attorney General's office. This one was a little different because it involved an actual website disruption for several hours. They reportedly extracted about 40 gigs of data from the Attorney General's servers. Once again, they immediately leaked the data for free on breach forums, and the content seemed to have various files from the Attorney General. And besides the files, once again, they included the credentials that allow more people to access the servers. And once again, no response from the government on this, despite this being the Attorney General's office. And an article about the incident by, again, sorry, Spanish speakers' pronunciation here, La Prensa Grafica, they say that when they reached out to the government 3 times for comment, twice somebody immediately hung up the phone once they identified who they were and why they were calling, and then once nobody answered. This particular incident received criticism from none other than Mario Gomez. Gomez, who Ciberinteligencia had expressed support for in the past, took a stance that I think I more or less align with given my limited details. So in an April 29th tweet, he kind of questions the group's motives. He talks about how the PGR also handles public defense, including critical services like enforcing child support systems and other things that directly benefit citizens. And I just wanted to say, before we move on to the string of leaks that happened in May, this is where things get extra dicey for me with Ciberinteligencia. There might have actually been a little bit of a break in the group along the lines of how to be responsible with the leaks, which I think is, for a lot of us listening, probably our biggest direct criticism of them. There's certainly some differences in the way some of the leaks are presented if you look at the different posts they put up on breach forums and in their Telegram channels. Some of them, particularly the ones posted to targets outside of El Salvador, have a price on them, but then most of them are advertised for free. So it just seems like a weird kind of change in tone. And they're almost written in a way that it doesn't sound like the same person. Also notable, if you follow their Telegram and other posting history, you could see that there's been some kind of back and forth, as well as accusations of imitators on several Twitter profiles and other Telegram accounts. And I'm wondering if there had been some kind of purge recently that we'll get to in a bit, because there was a direct message put out near what'll be the end of this timeline by the group about a change in message and a change in tone. What you're going to see going into May is this is when the media appearances and the public statements really pick up, and there does seem to be a unified message, a consistent set of principles that I definitely disagree with, but it is identifiable. This is when they had a lot of press reach out to them, so just bear that in mind. May was also a busy month for the group. They carried out at least 4 more breaches, 3 against major ICT sector entities in El Salvador, and 1 for a school of innovation and technology. The group also put out 2 public statements, one on the 10th of May and the other on the 11th. The first public statement involved the release of a report, perhaps by a whistleblower to Cyberintelligencia themselves, or perhaps it was a statement they got a hold of. In any case, it's in the aftermath of one of those aforementioned leaks. Again, they put it out on the 10th of May, and I wanted to read to you the best summary I could put together because it's actually kind of chilling. This allegedly leaked conversation is supposed to be about operations within the Secretariat of Innovation in El Salvador. All right, so first, a little background. The whistleblower alleges that the events began in response to the cyber attack on ESIT, a federally run tech and STEM school. Around 45 technical staff, managers, and coordinators were summoned to the Antigua Cuscatlan office. They were told it was going to be a morning meeting. Staff were greeted by the Deputy Secretary of Innovation and his legal assistant. It sounded okay at first, but then the atmosphere shifted when police officers arrived. They confiscated all the employees' phones and computers, including their personal devices, and detained employees in the office garden. The employees were reportedly not informed whether they were under arrest, but they were prohibited from leaving the premises. Later, 7 individuals were taken away by the police in a minibus. Those who remained were split into groups, confined to offices, and forbidden from speaking to one another. Employees were kept overnight without proper communication with their families and subjected to interrogations in the early hours of the morning. Devices were forcibly unlocked, and the content was reviewed without oversight. On the second day, employees were transported to a forensic center for polygraph tests that resembled interrogations about their involvement in the ESIT breach and about specific colleagues. The report implicates Daniel Mendez, the Secretary of Innovation, as orchestrating this ordeal, with protection allegedly coming from Ibrahim Bukele, the president's brother. Fatima Rodriguez, a Ministry of Health contractor who also serves as Mendez's assistant, is accused of mistreating staff during the process. After the police were ordered to leave by a superior, employees confronted the remaining officials and were eventually released. They're given options for time off, with many choosing immediate leave. 14 employees were fired, reportedly for speaking out during the ordeal. 7 individuals remain unreachable, their phones confiscated, and they have been unable to communicate since the incident. If the claim could be believed, the crackdown was sparked by the ESIT leak. The leak post ends with a warning. A new accreditation system was being set up for the upcoming presidential inauguration. Applications would be reviewed by the presidential squad, granting selective access to media and personnel. If the story could be believed, it shows that the government did, in fact, take the threat that Cyberintelligentsia presented seriously, but seemed far more interested in containing the story rather than reassuring the public. As I understand, ESIT is a specialized STEM school established by Bukele's government and tied to the Secretariat of Innovation. It's closely tied to the country's digital infrastructure, and its success is important to Bukele's public image. Having such a devastating breach would most certainly be an embarrassment. Maybe the story shows that things were starting to get personal. Maybe Cyberintelligentsia hit Bukele somewhere where it hurt. All that said, while I find a lot of reporting, again all local, on suspicious activity related to the ESIT breach, I didn't see anything that corroborates so many people being fired or disappeared in the aftermath of it. Reporting from La Prensa Grafica showed that the school remained closed for nearly a month after the incident. For one reason or another, I like to think it's because it was obvious things were heating up because of the incident with ESIT. Cyberintelligentsia released their official manifesto. Again, this is May 11th, 2024. Again, it was originally written in Spanish, but this is a translation. Motivations and other thoughts. We are not new to the world of hacks and leaks, but as a group of individuals from across Latin America, we decided to act together, focusing on El Salvador. We operate independently, funded by our own resources. We are not financed by any political party or third party, nor do we seek to profit or favor any political group. We do not take orders from anyone. We compromise organizations as we see fit, and we use our sources of information for the benefit of the common good, although not all our activities are made public for the safety of our members and sources. Anything you see on social media that does not originate from this channel, referring to their Telegram channel, or breach forums is false. Many people try to associate us with national political opposition groups, but let me emphasize, our motivations do not lie there. We seek to show people, in a raw and unfiltered way, the dangers of the modern digital society, how a handful of incompetent individuals control information and use it to manipulate the masses. Furthermore, we expose how all citizens are complicit in perpetuating a system of manipulation and control. We have expressed our discontent with the Salvadoran state, increasingly centralizing its power over individuals and heading towards a totalitarian regime. We believe that information does not belong to the state. It belongs to everyone. That is why we aim to liberate information for all, so people can truly understand how the system works and defend themselves against potential abuses. This does not only pertain to state organizations, but also to companies that mishandle their clients' information. We are aware of the potential misuse of information. We're equally convinced that there is proportional potential for its good use. We are simply waiting for the right moment to release information that has been kept locked away by a select few. Information belongs to the people, and everyone has the right to know. We stand against those who restrict information that belongs to Salvadoran society. P.S. Part of my personal inspiration came from the work Lagora Leaks. And then at the end, there's a link to their interview with Sheeb Daily. Just a quick aside, Lagora Leaks refers to a breach in 2019 of the Argentinian police apparatus. A lot of the details of it align a lot with the work shown with the Guacamaya leaks. Then on the 20th of May, they did a brief interview with El Salvador Now. In this one, they repeated a bunch of the main points of their manifesto, but also said that they were preparing 2 major tranches of leaked data totaling over 9 terabytes. They also mentioned a data breach that I actually wasn't able to find, but I found a lot of talk about it, but I have not found any major announcements in mainstream media about it, claiming that they had over 500,000 credit profiles that they were releasing and that they had taken a bunch of data from Equifax. I'm not saying they're full of shit. I mean, far from it, to be honest. I think we've seen at this point that the Salvadoran government is willing to cover things of this nature up. And this is now 8 weeks into the direct threat Cyberintelligencia has posed to them. And they do have all the data available. If you look hard enough, you can find the leaks. They give it all away. Well, they give it all away if you found it through their, I don't want to say legitimate, but through their primary channels. I just tend to not give my full trust in breach data if it's not verified by an external source. But I don't know, maybe it's naive of me, but I kind of had a tendency to maybe believe them, especially after what happened next. So I eventually got to talk to somebody representing the group. The conversation was brief, and understandably it felt a little guarded, and I just really wasn't sure what to expect. I was translating the responses, so I think there was a little connotation missed, but some of the details definitely seem like they're worth sharing. I don't want to retread too much territory. In it, they apologized for the late response, because it took a few weeks for them to get back to me, and they talked about how they were extremely busy analyzing data for the next leak and seeing if it was worth publishing. So, some things to highlight. I told them that the leaks were going to hurt regular people. While accepting my place as an outsider with nothing really on the line here, I still thought it was important to push on that. Like I said in the second episode, I was able to set up a Chivo Wallet account, and their breach data probably would have let me get full access with enough trial and error. Their response: hacktivism is a protest in itself. You've seen everything people do when they protest. It's their right. Sometimes you have to make a hard decision to send a message. I told about how the initial catalyst for the interview was the Chivo Wallet hack, before bringing me into what I later learned was going on with all the other leaks. I knew they had moved past Chivo, but I wanted to know their take on it. Any publications referencing our hack are just to wash their hands. I wasn't quite sure what he meant by that, but I wanted to make sure I included it. After years of activity, there are still people with blocked funds. There's been no response or solution. Chivo doesn't have any real offices where people can complain. The Customer Protection Office deliberately rejects petitions from those affected. Chivo was to be a tool of control and surveillance for Salvadorans. It was at this point that we talked about the mass incarceration and arrests of people in El Salvador. The speaker talked to me and showed me a specific document from the Guacamaya leaks and some of their work in April. Part of this included police communications and presentations that aligned with accusations that were corroborated in other Latin American publications. There's pretty incriminating evidence that suggested that the police were detaining people under extremely dubious circumstances. Some of these people were minors. Later in the conversation, they encouraged me to look for more evidence in the Guacamaya files related to the spying on and monitoring of dissidents. They also told me to look more closely at the ways Bukele was trying to hang on to power, the state of emergency, abuses of the Constitution, and the judiciary. We talked about the fact that neither of us could seem to figure out exactly where Bukele's Bitcoin and Bitcoin investment cash was coming from, and that this may be related to something that they were trying to investigate further. Their exact response was, "No one really knows. There's information being withheld." My last serious question for them was how they actually managed their breaches. The implication of their response was that it was almost all social engineering. As May turned to June, the administration began trying what every other authoritarian regime eventually tries in the face of such damning information coming to light. They tried to cut off the access to it. In early June, shortly after Nayib Bukele began his second presidential term, Salvadoran internet service providers deliberately restricted access to Telegram. This happened as citizens tried to access the leaked documents published by Ciberintelligentsia, specifically from the Supreme Court Justice and Tribunal Ethics Committee. Many reported being unable to open Telegram through mobile data or Wi-Fi, forcing them to rely on VPNs or proxies to access the platform. Several third-party monitors, including NetBlocks, identified multiple Salvadoran ISPs, including Movistar and Tigo, for blocking access to Telegram. Notably, these same companies had previously been targeted by CiberinteligenciaSV's data breaches. Angelica Carmaco, the head of El Salvador's Media Association, publicly compared it to measures used in authoritarian regimes like Russia or China. Despite the restrictions, Cyberintelligentsia continued to release sensitive files throughout June. These included legal documents tied to the controversial death of a former security advisor while in custody, the secret release of an MS-13 gang leader, and documents about the use of Pegasus spyware, previously used to surveil journalists and human rights defenders, as we mentioned in previous episodes. The content warning here, to skip ahead 20 seconds, about child abuse. Later that month, the group published disturbing statistics from the National Civil Police, revealing 183 reported cases of rape and sexual assault between January 1st and March 15th, 2024. Most of these involve minors. Then in July, the group conducted another interview with Global Voices. There wasn't a whole lot of new things mentioned in this one, but something I found interesting is that in this interview, they said that they were affiliated or had a relationship with another threat actor called FocaLeaks. They're a group that started in 2021, and they became known for leaking at the time data on at least 37,000 national police officers. This included their ID numbers, names, telephones, office assignments, and email addresses. They're another one who states that they are trying to expose governmental shortcomings, but they also, especially in 2022, have been shown to be willing to sell data as well. So that interview was the last major update I heard from Cyberintelligentsia until very recently. And that last bit about the willingness to sell stolen data is actually something that is going to come up in this next part, where I'm basically trying to figure out who is Cyberintelligentsia. Not that I'm going to be able to point a finger at any specific person, but there's this stated mission that they have. There's an effect that they're having on the narrative of the Salvadoran state and its ability to project its authority in technological spaces. It is an effective hacktivism campaign. However, there does seem to be some back and forth, some sort of disconnect with some of the things that they say in these interviews, some of the way they generally present themselves, and some of the things that I've seen. But very recently, it looks like they've actually taken steps to address this. Or it's another impersonator claiming that they've taken steps to address this. It gets a little messy for me. It seems this fall wrapped up, there was more scrutiny brought to the group. A number of their channels had been taken down, and allegedly, an impersonator tried to take their page from them on Twitter. To be honest, in the hacktivist space, this is actually kind of normal. It seems the biggest tell to legitimacy for Cyberintelligentsia is that they have been maintaining their leak channel uninterrupted on Telegram since at least June. They've since released a series of Telegram bots designed to help viewers comb their data. While I understand this could be easily abused by bad actors, and frankly, I think this should have just been left in the hands of journalists, but there is a clear commitment to maintaining this data, it remaining free, and a need to keep adding to it and making it accessible that's consistent with everything I've seen so far. When going back to their channel, I saw that there was some sort of conflict that seemed to reach its peak in early October. There seemed to be some struggle for ownership of their Telegram channel. I backed off from wrapping up the series then, as it seemed like there was something that needed to play out. Then I found a post on October 14th, reading, "In the last few days, without activity, we were discussing with the admins about the changes and guidelines that will take place with the hacktivist movement, and something bigger than you can imagine has already been agreed upon. And later in the evening, we'll give you the official statement of the situation. Be careful, because corruption will always come to light. We are CiberinteligenciaSV." Again, reminder, translation, not perfect. Then the statement later that night read, "Statement from the true hacktivist movement, CiberinteligenciaSV. Dear citizens, today we address you with the transparency and commitment you deserve. As many of you know, we have taken control of this Telegram group after discovering that the previous administrators were irresponsibly and dangerously exposing the security of Salvadorans. What they did by disclosing your personal information, names, addresses, jobs, salaries, and even information about your families, is unforgivable. The information was used by criminals, both inside and outside the country, to scam and extort many Salvadorans. They integrated this information to a Telegram query bot, which you'll also take down, making it easy for these criminals to commit crimes against you and your families. Even worse, we discovered that the previous administrators sold the information of Salvadorans to organizations in Central and South America, further worsening the security situation in the country. Sold out to external interests, they abandoned any sense of ethics or social purpose. Additionally, we found they were financed by political parties. These parties paid them to use this platform for their own interests, manipulating information and publishing biased content. It is clear that the intention of the former administrators was never to fight against corruption, but to exploit the data to line their own pockets, regardless of the harm caused to innocent people. We are a new movement that has hacked our Telegram group, and we are here to do things the right way. Our mission is clear: expose corruption, and exploit the systems of the regime that oppress the people without harming innocent individuals or endangering their security. We will not act against the population that has supported us. We'll always stand on the side of the truth. We invite all Salvadorans to reach out to us if they have been scammed or harmed by these individuals. If you have been victims of their actions or know any case of abuse, please let us know. We're here to serve you. We will make each of those responsible pay for their crimes. We'll not resist until each case is exposed and every scammer faces the consequences. Unlike the previous administrators, we are not in the service of the highest bidder. Our only commitment is to the people. We will continue exposing government corruption without compromising the privacy or security of Salvadorans. Thank you for your trust. We move forward with more strength than ever. In that time, the group has set up a much more legitimate-looking platform within a dark web forum for discussion, beyond just Telegram and Twitter. And I like what I hear here. However, I don't know if I trust it. It almost sounds too good to be true. On one hand, CiberinteligenciaSV has been very direct in all their public statements about what they're about. But this statement, perhaps different in tone, does fall very much in line with it. But the criticisms made in it, if there was ever a time, these points about abuse of the data and irresponsibility could be applied, it would have been from the very start. It almost reads like a fundamental criticism of everything the group has been doing from square one. I guess I'm just not sure where the current leadership is at. Is it the original leadership? The post says it's a wholly new movement. I haven't seen nearly as much activity from them, especially on breach forums, since making this announcement. Maybe a very groundless but charitable reading is that the group kind of took the criticism that journalists, other experts, people like Mario Gomez have been placing on them and decided that they needed to save some face, and while they're still anonymous, make some attempt to distance themselves from everything that had happened before. However, if I needed any more evidence that the group was fractured in some way on messaging or follow-through, on November 23rd, shortly before recording this, there's a post on the old Cyberintelligentsia breach forums account. Their first one, as far as I could tell, in over 4 months, and they're selling medical records on it. This is actually like one of their most blatant attempts to make money off of something they leaked. And as far as I can tell, it's connected to the same Telegram account from the very beginning. There are some caveats in the sales pitch saying like they'll only sell to people they can verify or in El Salvador and stuff like that. Maybe there's something I'm missing here, but it's like bizarrely incongruous with everything that was written in that October manifesto. It does make me think that somebody here is an imposter. I just don't know who. I guess to figure out who's legitimate and who isn't, we got to look at the 3 platforms the group was most active on in April and May. The first one, the original Telegram group ID, is the one that posted the October manifesto. It seems to have new ownership and is saying all the cool things, but it's been on life support since that manifesto was posted. There's very little going on that channel. The statement was very much in line with stuff that Cyberintelligentsia has been saying to the press, but it tonally feels very different from the group I encountered in April and May, which, to be fair, it's not like they didn't say it was new management. Their most active channel, with its history before June purged for one reason or another, is still the one with the search bots and files that are actually downloadable. It seems to be maintaining the same pace and tone it always has, with leaks coming out relatively regularly, but none of them are going up on breach forums anymore. The group is also linked to the Twitter account and the dark web forum routinely, and I'd imagine this is the same group I actually engaged with back in April and May. In this one, they say that the Telegram channel with the October manifesto is not to be trusted. This group continues to try and run what appears to be a diligent customer service on their data leaks and search bots. But then, the wrench in the machine here is that somebody posted to the group's breach forums account with these medical records. Again, first time in 4 months, with that breach not being posted to either of the other channels. Its bio on breach forums links to the group with the October manifesto. So it's linking to the group that I find suspicious, while also behaving the most incompatible with what was written in that manifesto. And I do want to also mention that that post on breach forums links to the ID of someone who at least shares a username with the original admin of the oldest Cyberintelligentsia Telegram group. So either someone was exiled, someone is impersonating, or somebody took over an account. But in any case, there is something afoot here. Full disclosure, I plan on reaching back out to everybody that I can involved with this at some point early in the new year. Cyberintelligentsia stands as a prime example of what, in my mind, hacktivism can be, but also some of the most egregious examples of ethical dilemmas it inevitably raises. Their campaign against El Salvador's government has been both audacious and impactful, and exposes systemic failures in data security and reveals some of the authoritarian underpinnings of Nayib Bukele's administration. Yet, their actions are not without consequences. By targeting the Chivo Wallet, government institutions, and other critical systems, the group has laid bare the vulnerabilities in the digital infrastructure of a nation, experimenting with high-tech solutions for its economic and social challenges. Their message is clear. The Bukele administration, despite its attempts to modernize, has built a system that prioritizes control, perception of success, and possibly the enrichment of its ruling class over its citizens' privacy and security. It is a damning indictment of a government selling itself as a pioneer of tech-driven progress. And let's be honest, Cyberintelligentsia isn't alone in the fight. They're only one of the most famous and newest iterations of a broader wave of Latin American hacktivists like Guacamaya, Focaleaks, and Goraleaks. All these groups have challenged state power and corporate exploitation. What sets CiberinteligenciaSV apart is their focus specifically on El Salvador's unique intersection of technology, governments, and financial experimentation, hacktivism as a form of resistance against unjust systems. Still, as with all hacktivist groups, while the intent may be to expose corruption and authoritarianism, their methods have put regular people at risk. I cannot say this enough, the exposure of personal data leaves millions of Salvadorans vulnerable to identity theft, fraud, exploitation, and all that, but also violence. Like, think about doxing, especially in a country that, until very recently, was dominated by gangs. In their pursuit of transparency, Cyberintelligentsia has willingly risked endangering the very people they claim to defend. This is what makes them so compelling to me. They force a reckoning with the failings of a government and its tech-driven policies. On the flip side, it is one of the most obvious examples of the collateral damage activism can cause, and whether the ends truly justify the means. But also, to be honest, if it wasn't for them, there's a good chance I wouldn't have spent nearly as much time looking into the warnings El Salvador may hold for other democracies. I truly find what's going on in El Salvador to, in part at least, be a warning for other countries, especially the United States. As I wrap up the series, I'm left with a sense of caution and curiosity. I hope the story continues to force uncomfortable conversations. I'm not going to ask the dumb question oh, the hero or the villain. I think the important thing is that they made me pay attention. And, for me, the story isn't over. I plan on reaching out to these people again. As I grow in influence, I want to reach out to more of the journalists who have had to interact with Cyberintelligentsia. And, I'm always going to remain critical of their methods. But I find myself drawn to the questions they raise about justice, transparency, and the cost of resistance in a world dominated by technocracy. To me, this is truly hacktivism. Hey, thanks for listening. If you want to check out more of the work I'm doing with this project, you can go to virtualveritypod.com or themoloch.com. This should take you to the same place. Find me on Twitter and Blue Sky at MarkJBruno and It's Bruno, respectively. The Moloch blog should also be on Mastodon on the InfoSec Exchange. You can shoot me an email at contact@themoloch.com. All writing, editing, planning, and production is done by myself, Mark Bruno. Artwork was provided by CM Kosemen. All music is provided by Chris Delano.
Greetings, citizens of the world.
This is Virtual Verity.
We are anonymous.
It has cameras and sensors.
It's a podcast.
But it turns out someone else may have been watching too.
And just like your phones and social media apps.
And although it was a piece of malicious ransomware on the surface, the attack wasn't really about money.
We are Legion. We do not forgive.